Alright, it's been a minute since I've made a video just straight up talking about an upcoming game. Most of my content has shifted away from that a little bit, but I felt like I had to make a bit of an exception here because Little Devil Inside is important to this channel and its roots. And if you've been following it, you probably know why I'm excited to hear more from this game. This is an indie title that's now being backed by PlayStation with a unique blend of origami and almost clay-like 3D models. It's shown off biomes that go from expansive and minimalist to compact and dense. It features a slew of monster types, some that are smaller that you fight in groups, others that tower over you and force you to use all your tools to take them down. The trailers have done a fantastic job of setting up the world this game takes place in, this sort of Victorian setting with weird science experiments and bounty hunters all wrapped in this air of mystery, and best of all, it's goofy. You surf penguins in the desert, shark people attack you and then run off screaming when they see you massacring their friends, and in one of the trailers, a bomb turns into poop. I mean, give it Game of the Year right now, I say. But the question has always been, the game of which year? Whether or not it can live up to the lofty expectations of eager fans is one thing, but can it even live up to the expectation that it's gonna release? Its first major showing might have been at that PlayStation conference back in 2020, but it started as a Kickstarter project in 2015, a whole 9 years ago, and since 2020's trailer, the only update we got was in late 2021, which claimed that the game was releasing sometime in 2022. And just let me check my notes here to make sure. Yeah, that date seems to have passed, but now, finally, on a random Wednesday in February, the official LDI page dropped a video called Despite All, which is about 6 minutes of new footage with not a ton of context. I mean, there's still not even a release date, which might make you wonder how the game seems somehow farther from release today than it did 2.5 years ago. And the answer to that is actually found on their Kickstarter page, which they did update along with this trailer. The update is a little bit vague and strangely worded. It is a Korean development team though, so that can just be tossed up to translation issues, but the gist of it is this. Throughout development, the game's scope and the team size continued to grow, but the changes in the people didn't always mesh with the original team's vision for the project. The team at Neostream has now downsized, though it still maintains all the members that started the process all those years ago, and in their own words, they are now back with a smaller, bonded team with a single common purpose, just to make a great game. They apologize for the delays and lack of news, but they seem to be much more confident with this new group and the direction the game is heading. They also mentioned that discussions on publishing had begun in earnest, after which they would be able to answer what everyone wants to know, which is obviously an actual release date, and that they've switched over to Unreal Engine 5, which I'm sure has also been the culprit of a lot of these delays, transferring everything over to a new engine. That brings us to the end of their actual statement, but of course there's also the 6 minutes of footage that they tagged alongside it, so given all this new information, what seems to have actually changed in the game? To be honest, most of the stuff that we've seen to date seems to be relatively intact in the new footage. I assume a lot of the changes were in the forms of reining in the sheer size of the game world and maybe swatting down ideas that never actually made it to any of the game's showcases over the years. But as far as public knowledge on this thing, this falls pretty in line with that. In 2021's trailer, they introduced the concept of this overworld map where you could take the train, drive around, or just walk through areas at a different scale and time signature. Early in development, they mentioned that they didn't want the game to have a fast travel option because preparation and a genuine bounty hunter / survival experience was a big part of the gameplay loop, and this overworld system allows that no fast travel rule to exist in a game map that is, by all indications, ridiculously huge. The map does seem to be brushed up in comparison to the last time we saw it. It looks a little better, it separates itself into sections now and makes it more clear what you can interact with to transition into normal mode. And we gotta look at more unique encounters that can happen through this overworld system, like accidentally hitting this deer with your car, which is an event that can be interacted with regularly. What's still not clear though is if all of this space fully exists outside of the overworld map or not. Like for example, can I stop right here and start exploring this forest and after 10 minutes of walking around press the overworld button and I've actually moved to a new spot there? Or can I only enter and exit from these points of interest which have certain limits? Basically, is this the actual seamless explorable map or is it just a bunch of discrete areas and the overworld map fills in the gaps so you can go between them? I'm leaning towards the former given the elevator pitch of this game, but considering how big it all seems, I wouldn't be surprised if they took a few shortcuts to achieve this. The focus on traveling, maintaining resources, and finding clever ways to take down monsters is also still here. You seem to be meeting a lot of people, some who might sell things to you, others who may want you to do things for them, and some just add color to the game. Like in one case you stumble onto a dude dressed as a sheep because, and I quote, he loves sheep. You apparently wind up getting the same outfit later, maybe from bartering with that character, and that can actually be used to hide in a herd of sheep to get the jump on this evil Totoro thing. My favorite though is when this group of hunters shows up by your campfire and asks for food. You have the option to either fight them or share your food with them. One of those I assume drains more resources but might gain you a group of allies. There are scenes later where you seem to be heading out with a little caravan of dudes, while the other is more ruthless and dangerous but probably lets you loot the hunters afterwards for more resources. These are the exact kind of interactions that the game has always hinted towards in Kickstarter updates or trailer voiceovers, but it's cool to see them in action for the first time. There's a lot of really small, subtle sound effects in the background of most scenes, and mixed with the UI, it definitely still has that sort of minimalist presentation that made it so endearing to begin with, but it's also got that banging soundtrack again. Every piece of music they've shown off has been incredible, and I think it complements the game really well. The game also looks even more impressive than ever, and I love how scenes can instantly jump from idyllic to horrific, but still keep a lot of the same DNA. There's one scene in particular that looks like it plays out almost like one of those little nightmare set piece sections where you need to use the environment to hide your little body from these giant monsters, eventually ending in a big escape sequence. I'm also really curious how these weird little experiments on tentacles and I don't even know what this is, like a giant mouth fungus, are gonna tie into the rest of the game. Maybe this is how you discover weaknesses for certain creatures or develop new tools. Some scenes definitely chugged along a little bit, that indicates there's probably a lot more optimization to do, but overall there's only one thing that has me a little worried, and it's the combat. In terms of the systems, it looks great. I mean, we've seen very creative tools in the game's marketing already, but we also see more gun types here, like the sniper and a flintlock. We see a flaming sword. I assume that's like a buff that requires you to collect certain resources to achieve. And we see that you can actually two-hand your weapon for stronger attacks. I might be misremembering, but I think that's new. But as for the level of polish in the combat, it's less than ideal. In old footage, a lot of the combat seemed kind of, I guess the best way to describe it is floppy. Your animations were a little bit looser, and enemies would wriggle and stick to your sword a little as you hit them. It wasn't the best, but it had its own unique flavor, and I could see it working with some small improvements. Eventually in new trailers that eased up a little bit, and now, while all the models are definitely still kind of boneless in the way they move, their reactions and stagger have been toned down a bit, as of their body's tendencies to slow down your sword when you hit them. You sort of just slash through them now. Basically, it looks a little flatter. There were always some concerns with the combat, but I always assumed as the game got more polished they'd be addressed. I think currently it looks kinda off though, especially with the enemy AI seeming pretty passive, in some instances even acting like they've completely lost aggro only to immediately send out an attack. I don't think it's terrible though, a lot of this can still be cleaned up a little bit. The game also has much more going on outside of combat, but I do think this is my biggest question mark, and I would love for a demo to come out at some point so we could see how the combat feels, especially against larger monsters. Overall, the game continues to look good, that's not much of a surprise. I'm also almost more optimistic knowing the internal struggles going on with this game than I was back in 2021 when I was concerned they were biting off a bit more than they could chew. There was a certain vibe to the game around then that I wasn't a big fan of. I was honestly ready to believe that when this game came out it would be a hot mess of disorganized ideas that strayed way too far from the original concept, and it looked like it was in fact dangerously close to that before it presumably righted the ship. The statement from Neostream seems confident, and my only hope now is that they keep players up to date going forward. They did acknowledge that they dropped the ball on that. It's also a special case because this game was partially funded by real-life regular people with real-life regular people money, so it would be nice to hear updates more often, even if it's just, hey, this is a small thing we've been working on, here's a clip. That's usually enough every couple of months for a publicly funded project. As for the release date, I mean, people ask me about this every once in a while because I made videos on LDI back in the day. It was one of the things that springboarded this channel, and they always ask me when the game's coming out like I have insider information. Like, no dude, why would anybody be telling me anything? I'm as clueless as you are. I will say, I think it's pretty safe to say the game's not coming out in 2024. I know they've said that they started those conversations on publishing, but I think we're still a ways off. My best guess is that we hear about a release date later this year or early next year for around summer 2025, but follow-up prediction, that's also going to be delayed and the game's going to launch in early 2026. I think it's about time that we accept that this is pretty far out still, at it'll come when it comes. Hey, maybe it'll surprise us, maybe it'll be out next month or something, but you'll be damn sure I'm not gonna actually expect that. That's a recipe for disaster. I'm curious to know how everyone's feeling on this game. Are you excited about the updates? Have you lost interest? Did you never have interest to begin with? Is this something that you're hearing about for the first time somehow? It's definitely a weird one. I'm still pretty excited for it, but I'll continue to sort of treat it like it's not real until it's actually in my hands. But let me know what you guys think. If you're new here, subscribe. Go watch my last video where I make a bunch of games that didn't get delayed. That was a fun one. Join the Discord, it's in the description, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.